Bom dia e muitíssimo obrigado. My name is Scott Price, and it is my honor and privilege to be with you today and to share with you some of my favorite people in the entire world and how they learn music at the piano. Before we begin, I would just like to take a moment to thank you and to thank the organizers of the conference for allowing me to be with you today. And I hope that you are all safe and well during the pandemic. And I would also like to express my heartfelt thanks to you for the work that you are doing and for keeping music study alive for your students when their lives have just been turned upside down during the last 2 years. In my heart and my mind, you are heroes, and I thank you for your work and just for continuing to be that supportive person in the lives of your students. That's a wonderful thing, and I'm sure they are so grateful as I am. So what I would like to do today is to share with you some of my students who just happen to have autism and how they have taught me that I need to change my thinking and my teaching to be able to meet their needs during the lesson. So to that end, it might be helpful for us just to briefly review autism and then talk about 4 ideas that my students have taught me about how I need to rethink my teaching. And then we'll go through just the basics of a lesson and show you some lesson routines, some counting and reading procedures that I use with my students, and then a little mini concert at the end. And I think we'll have some time for questions and answers as well after the video ends. So what is autism? I'm sure you're all familiar with that term and probably know someone or a friend of a friend who may have autism. But autism is a developmental disability, and it can be characterized by 3 things. And the first is a deficit in social communication. And that word deficit is very negative, and I tend to not like those kinds of words because it always sort of describes a person as being less than, and I want them to be part of. So I like to say difference in social communication. And what I mean by that is that my student may be nonverbal, or they may have a very limited vocabulary based on their developmental delays, or they may have other ways that they need to communicate that are different from our traditional student. And so I like to watch them very carefully because that communication, it can be a body movement, or it can be a different sound that they make, or they may have a different way of expressing themselves verbally in sounds, and I need to learn that sort of quote unquote language that they're using. Our second thing are differences in social behaviors. Now, if you and I meet each other on the street, we would know based on our gender, our age, our social position, what vocabulary that we could use to greet each other. And we would also know how close we could stand to each other, or we would know how much eye contact to make, or if we shook hands, we would know how long to initiate that contact or how hard to squeeze the person's hand. Now, with our students with autism, often they aren't able to learn those behaviors, or they aren't able to observe them, because many of us were taught these behaviors, or many of us learned these behaviors without being taught. So our students need to be taught all of these things. And those can be as simple as learning how to wait quietly for the lesson, how to say hello and wait to be invited into the studio, where to put their books, how to get ready for the lesson, and then how to sit quietly, how to pay attention, and how to take turns. So those are things that have to be taught often to these students. And our third thing are differences in imaginative thought. And I'll give you an example of that. Metaphors and analogies don't work very well for our students with autism. And so with a traditional student, I might say something like, if they need to make a crescendo in a phrase, I might say, well, the phrase needs to grow until it reaches this place in the music. Well, in literal terms, if you think about what I just said, it was entirely ridiculous because phrases don't grow. Grass grows, animals grow, people grow. And if I have a very bright student, that student might tell me that I'm wrong because they know that when you play a key on the piano, the sound immediately begins to decay and there's no way that it can grow. And you know what? They're right. So a way I would approach that with a student with autism who needs very literal imaginative constructs is to say, all right, in this phrase, with your finger number 1 on the first note, I need for you to touch that one very gently. For finger number 2, I need you to touch it more strongly with your finger number 2. For finger number 3, I need you to play that one strong. Finger number 4, much more strong, and finger number 5 is strong. And that way, my student is able to understand how a phrase would grow with a crescendo, but they understand it in terms of exactly what to do with their fingers to make that sound occur at the keyboard. Now, autism is often referred to as a spectrum disorder. And what that means is everyone with autism will fall at some place on that spectrum. Some people might fall at one end where they need continuous care throughout the day. They may be nonverbal, they might have a limited vocabulary. And then other people might fall at the other end of the spectrum where you may not know that they have autism, or they may be able to hold down a job, or be remarkably self-sufficient. So what that means is every student with autism will be a different student with autism, and we need to reframe and rethink our pedagogy to meet the needs of that particular student. Now, to do that, I have learned 4 things from my students, or 4 things that my students have taught me to be able to function well within their world. And I'd like to share those with you right now because they are really at the heart of how I've changed my teaching to help my students become successful. And the first is that I am the student, my student with autism is the teacher. And I really do believe that. When a student sits on the bench in front of my piano in my studio, they are the teacher, I am the student. They are a sacred presence, they are brilliant, and I know that I'm going to get a master class in teaching from them. So I need to observe them very carefully, and I need to listen, and listen with more than just my eyes and my ears. And I also need to do a great deal of self-reflection and evaluation in my teaching after they have finished with me. The second thing is that if my student has a disability, I need to think of them as not having a disability. I need to think of myself as having a disability. So if my student is blind, I need to put on a blindfold and try to play my repertoire, my scales and arpeggios, try to find my way around my studio, and figure out what it is like to exist in their world so that I can change my teaching. If my student has autism, I need to remove all of the analogies and metaphors from my speaking and find ways to work in more of a step-by-step detailed process than I normally would with my other students. So to recap, I am the person with the disability. My student with autism is the person who is quote unquote normal or traditional in their music making. The third thing is that I need to approach my student and speak to them in vocabulary that is age appropriate and child specific. Now, what I mean by age appropriate is that just because my student with autism might be 16 years old chronologically, doesn't mean that he is 16 years old in his intellectual development or 16 years old in his emotional development. He may be physically 16 years old, but in his intellectual development, he could be 10 years old, or in his emotional development, 5 years old. So I need to speak to them in ways that are appropriate for those different ages. And for child-specific language, I'll give you an example of that. I had a student who was autistic, and for some reason, he believed that the black keys on the keyboard were green. And so I started calling them green keys because in his mind, he was not going to change. And so I just kept notes knowing that when David came for his lesson, we were going to talk about green keys because that was the way he needed to learn. That was an example of child-specific language. Now, sure, I tried to teach him that the black keys were indeed black, but it was very useful for us to refer to them as green. And then the fourth thing is that I always need to mean what I say and say what I mean. In modern teaching and modern everyday culture, we don't do that a lot. We speak in slang and pop culture references. And often when we are talking to one another, we will use facial expressions and nodding to show the other person that we get the gist or the understanding of what they are saying. And sometimes we don't even finish the idea. We have all these the shared body of knowledge that we bring to a situation. And we'll often not finish an idea, but move on to the next topic. Our students with autism often are not able to do those things, or they don't possess that shared body of knowledge. So what I need to do is to make sure that I teach the meanings of every word that I'm going to use, make sure they understand it, and that they understand it in the context of music making. And I need to teach all of that and remove any abstractions, metaphors, analogies from my communication that are going to cause trouble for them. So those are 4 things that my students have taught me, and when I follow those 4 things, I'm much more successful in my teaching. And if I make mistakes, I usually go back to those 4 things and will find that I failed in one of those areas. And so the next day is a new day, and I just try to do better. Now what I'd like to do is just show you some of my students during the lesson doing the types of things that any other student would do during a piano lesson, but doing them in a slightly different way to meet their needs. One of the first things that I do is establish a routine. And a routine or a schedule for learning is something that's very important for a student with autism. They have a need to know what is going to happen next in a step-by-step fashion. If there's something new or unexpected, often that can be a trigger for a behavioral or emotional outburst, which can be temper tantrums, or it can cause a complete shutdown in the student where they just disappear into their own world and they no longer react to the outside world. So what I do in these routines is that I tell the student exactly what's going to happen step by step throughout the lesson. And then when we do an activity, I also break that down into a step-by-step routine as well. So I'd just like to show you 3 examples of these routines and how the students react to them. In our first routine, this young man, Aaron, is nonverbal. He's also low functioning on the autism spectrum, and he has to learn a lot of the behaviors to get ready for the lesson. So that's what you'll see in our routine, is me teaching him a lot of the things that he needs to do to be able to begin the process of learning at the piano. Hi, Aaron. Good. That was great waving. Good for you. Are you ready to play the piano? Aaron, look at me. Are you ready to play the piano? Hands down. We're going to work on paying attention. We're going to work on eyes looking at the keyboard. We're going to work on taking turns. We're going to work on your fingers. We're going to work on playing black keys and playing white keys. Are you ready? Are you ready? Aaron, look at me. Look at me, Aaron. Aaron, look at me. I'm here. Eyes looking at the keyboard. You can play. So he's a wonderful young man. And you'll notice that we really didn't do a whole lot of actually playing the piano. He was just getting ready to learn to play the piano. Now you notice that I'm touching Aaron a lot, and I realize that these days in our world, we are very sensitive about touching children, but I always have a parent in the lesson with me while I'm teaching, and much of the touching is done by design. I'm either soothing the child or trying to signal that different types of attention need to be given to different things. And so the parents always know why I'm touching a student and when it's going to be done. And also sometimes a student with autism doesn't want to be touched. And that's fine. We can still find other ways of gaining joint attention and also focusing their thinking and their learning. Our next student is Margaret. And Margaret was born 3 months premature. She is nearly blind. She has developmental delays, speech delays, and fine motor skill delays as well. And she's what we would characterize as being lower functioning on the autism spectrum. Now for Margaret, she's a happy, bubbly personality, and you'll hear us go through her routine, and then at the end, you will hear her go right back to the beginning and tell me what we are going to do first. Now, you may think, I lost my paper that I wrote down for the routine, or you might think, I can't remember what's going to come next in the lesson. Well, if that ever happens to you with a student with autism, these children have a wonderful ability and gift for remembering lists and details. So if you ever forget or you lose your paper, just look at them and say, what's next? And they will tell you what's next every single time.
Right, that sounds like fun.
This is not the piano.
Wait a second.
Now wait a second.
We're going to work on your fingers,
Work on your fingers.
work on your hands.
Work on your palms.
Then we're going to work on your scales.
Scales, jumping.
Yeah, jumping, good. You remember to jump to those scales. Then we're going to do your pieces.
Pieces.
And then we're going to do duets.
Oh
boy. Time to go.
Now time to go.
All right, hands down, hand in your lap. What are we going to do first?
Do you mind or parrots?
Yes.
Mine is
play your C.
So Margaret's just a wonderful personality. Our next student is Brittany, and Brittany was born 4 months premature. She is blind from birth, profoundly disabled, and very low functioning on the autism spectrum. She has a very limited vocabulary. And as profound as her disabilities are, her musical gifts are equally profound on the other end of the spectrum. And she was later diagnosed as being a prodigious savant. And this is a young lady who taught herself how to play the piano. And she has in her mind a vocabulary of thousands of popular songs, Broadway show tunes, hymn tunes, and classical melodies that she can reproduce at will in simplified arrangements. And although she cannot speak much herself, she can sing you the lyrics for all of these songs. At the end, you'll see her go right back to the beginning and tell me what's happening first in the routine. But her speech delays are so profound that it will take her quite a few seconds to actually form the consonant of the letter M and be able to pronounce it.
Are you ready to go? Yes. Okay. Today we are going to do my turn, your turn. Then we're going to do fingers. Then we're going to do the bright sky.
My goodness.
Right. Then we're going to do the bright sky.
My goodness.
With the new part. Then we're going to do fingers. Then Beethoven.
Sonata Opus 2, number 1.
Then we're going to do, if we have time, Brittany Scott duets. And then songs. What's first? Yes, what's first? What are we going to do first? First, we are going to do
So Brittany is a wonderful, wonderful student and a wonderful musician. And what I hope also came out of those videos was that I slightly changed my teaching persona for each student. Brittany needs to be, or to have a much more soothing environment. So when I'm speaking to her, I gently make my voice much more soothing and quiet and gentle. It's just a little bit more bouncy with Margaret because that's the kind of thing that she needs. So I try to change my teaching persona a little bit to match my students' communication style, thereby hoping to create a more safe space for them where they feel comfortable communicating. Now, the next thing I'd like to show you is just another one of my students named Stanton, and he'll be working on music reading. Now, for Stanton, we're going to break down the process into a series of very specific and detailed steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is close the keyboard, and then we're going to work on finger numbers, and then we will work on key names, and then we'll open the piano, I will give a model, and then we will work step by step. One of the things that he understands is that a note name and a key name are the same thing. And I usually try to refer to key names, but in this video clip, you'll see me referring to it as both. So when he looks at a note on the staff, he knows that that is a key that he needs to press. That removes a lot of layering and abstraction in the learning process. One thing that's also different about me in this clip teaching Stanton is that I do a lot of what I like to call teaching in the process. And what that means is that I am there with him every second of the learning process, talking to him, guiding his fingers, guiding his attention, and trying to keep mistakes from happening so that they don't become obstacles to his learning. And that's a little different from traditional lessons where we generally ask a student to do something, we sit back and observe, and then we enter into the learning process. So I found this to be very, very important for all of my students with autism, working with them in the process.
Can we work on some more challenge?
Yeah.
No? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good. You had to work on lines 1 and 2. Let's do line 1. Finger numbers. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. Again, ready, go. 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. The names, ready?
Yeah.
D, A, D, E, F, A, F, E, G and A, F and A, E and A. My turn. Your turn. Get ready. Get ready. That's correct. Where's your right hand? Where's your right hand?
Oh, come on.
Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Very good. And E. And great. Do it again. Are you ready? 1, 2, ready, go. Very good. Do it again.
I don't know. I don't know.
So Stanton is what we would call fairly low functioning on the autism spectrum. He has developmental delays, speech delays, and fine motor skill delays. but you can see how intensely he is concentrating on his work and getting real results from a step-by-step process. And you'll notice with a lot of these children that I say, are you ready? Can we? I always ask permission to do a skill. And if they say yes, they are inviting me into their process and showing me that they are ready to work on something. If they say no, I have to decide if they need a little bit more time or if it's an avoidance behavior. And if it is an avoidance behavior, then I am usually gently insistent on asking again until they say that they are ready to do the skill. Our next example is Margaret again. And Margaret is working on a piece in triple meter, Belle the Bashful Butterfly by Martha Meir. And she has trouble sometimes physically coordinating short and long durations of notes, or in getting her hands to do what she hears in her mind. So with Margaret and with all of my students, what I do is I've tried to create a system of counting that I call directive words. And what that means is a quarter, quarter, half note pattern would be play, 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 hold, or that's how we would count it. And what those words do is they tell the student what exactly to do with their fingers to be able to execute the passage and sound at the piano. What it does is it removes math from the situation. It removes all kinds of levels of abstraction from the counting and just gets right to the basics of do this with your body to make this sound and do this with your body to make the next sound. And you'll see her working on those throughout this piece. Again, I'm working in the process with Margaret, and you'll hear me saying things like play, hold, or play, hold it along with her.
Belle Bashful Butterfly.
Can you play it again? Remember to hold your notes, please.
Yes.
Both hands ready.
Your turn.
Are you ready? There, now you're.
Now your turn. Butterfly.
So will you remember to hold your notes?
Yes.
So she's wonderful and she's very patient with the process. The next clip that I would like to show you is Brittany. And this is just an example of how I'm doing everything that I've done with the other students, but in a non-verbal capacity. Since Brittany has a very limited vocabulary, what I'm doing here is just breaking down the process through modeling, playing the right hand, playing the left hand, and then letting her put it back together because she is so precociously talented. Now you'll also notice that I'm sitting slightly behind her and I have my arms around her as I play. This is just to facilitate the process. And again, there's a parent in the lesson the entire time who knows what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And you'll also see Brittany making some very strange motions with her hands. And this is because this young lady is so excited about the sound of the piano and the sound of music that she just can't contain her excitement over it.
Good. Can we work on the bright sky by Gerlich?
And we going to play the bright sky.
Can we work on the bright sky by Gerlich?
Yeah.
All right. Listen.
Alright.
I'm going to play, then it'll be your turn. Listen. Listen. Very good. Listen, hands down. Hands down. Your turn. Good.
And
Listen. Your turn.
your turn.
Uh-oh. Is that right? That's better. You're gonna get in trouble. Do it the right way. Do it again. Do it the right way.
All right, so there was an example of what we call hand over hand teaching as well, with me touching her fingers and showing her how to play. Now, it may seem that I was being overly stern in telling her to do it the right way, but please remember that Brittany is extremely gifted, and in her mind, the way Gurlitt wrote it isn't that interesting. So she wants to change the music and make it more interesting. So we have to differentiate between Gurlitt's way, and if Brittany will do it Gurlitt's way, then she can do it Brittany's way, which is to change the notes and make it more interesting to her ear. So she's a very precocious student, very, very gifted. Just the way we teach her is a little bit different than a traditional student. Now, to close out our time today, I would like to show you just a brief recital of some of these students who are playing improvisations. I teach improvisation in every lesson, and it is a learning tool for us. And I require my students to improvise for the audience at all of the public recitals that we do. All the things that you will see these students doing, with the exception of one repertoire piece, are things that we would do normally in lessons. However, they are just doing this in the moment. There's been no pre-coaching. So I hope you enjoy.
Are you ready?
Okay.
One, ready, go.
Yeah, now I am. Way to go.
Good job. One. motive. Listen, listen. Okay, my turn. Hands down. Hands down. This is your motive. That's your motive. Let's play your motive. Why don't you use this finger? Can you do it?
If anyone ever tells you that a person with disabilities cannot learn, cannot be successful in their music study, or cannot be a creative person in their music making, I think we've just seen that all of these students have proven that to be not true, that they can achieve success just like any other student, and they deserve to be part of the musical world and what we all do. The triumph of the human spirit just always amazes me whenever I see these children doing what they can do. So thank you again very much for allowing me to be with you today. Thank you for letting me share the work of my students with you. I hope you all stay safe and well, and congratulations again on being heroes in the work that you're doing to keep music making alive for your students through this difficult time. Thank you very much. And I think we'll have some time now to answer some questions.